All right, AP Environmental Science. This is topics 8.9 and 8.10. We'll probably spend a couple of minutes or a couple of days, I should say, on these two topics that deal with solid waste and waste reduction methods. So let's go ahead and start off today talking a little bit about cups. Um, Cups come in a lot of different varieties. We're talking about the disposable cups here, things like plastic cups, and there's paper cups and styrofoam cups, whatever. But I want to just kind of talk about a couple of different statistics involving cups. So in the United States alone, 25 billion with a B foam cups are consumed. That's not produced, that's just used every single year, 25 billion. Foam cups are made of plastic. Styrofoam is actually a plastic derivative. So kind of like your red Solo cups, your plastic cups. Styrofoam is just made of the same plastics. It's just you know a little bit different, but lots and lots of plastic is produced just to make these cups every single year, and to produce these plastics or these styrofoams. A ton of oil is used just in the production. So we've talked about burning fossil fuels. There's a ton of that just used to produce these plastic and styrofoam cups every year. Plastic trash makes up 80% of all marine debris. So all of the garbage and debris that gets into the ocean, 80% of that is plastics. Plastic creates toxic pollution at every stage of its existence. That means the manufacturing stage, using it and disposing of it, it's toxic pollution all the way through. The United States airline industry uses 9 billion plastic cups every single year. You might ask, where do all those things go? It's kind of interesting to think about that. 63 pounds of plastic per person per year are thrown away, and that makes up 30% of all of our landfill space. Now, paper cups, this is a completely different thing. This is paper. You might think, well, paper is a lot more better for the environment than plastic and styrofoam. Well, we throw away about 58 billion paper cups every single year. And to make those paper cups, we cut down 20 million trees every single year just to make those cups. 12 billion gallons of water are used just to make a year's worth of paper cups. And then finally, for every 4 paper cups that are generated, 1 pound of CO2 emissions are actually given off. So I want you to think right now about your life and how often you use these cups, whether they be plastic, styrofoam, or paper cups. And think about the environmental impact that everything that's mentioned on this PowerPoint slide. And I challenge you to do something about it individually. You may not be able to go out and recruit 1,000 people to stop using cups. That's my job maybe, but you can do it on your own. Maybe you can think about the next time you go to I don't know, go to McDonald's or something, instead of I don't know, um, getting a large drink, maybe you get a small one. It's a smaller plastic cup than the bigger one is, right? I mean, that's something maybe we can think about. Maybe you don't use straws. Straws are made of plastic, right? So maybe you get it without the straw. I mean, there are simple things that maybe we can do to cut down on our plastic use, but cups seems to be maybe something that, I don't know, maybe something simple that we can maybe do. I don't know. So think about that. I just wanted to start off today by talking about that. So what this is kind of leading up to is just this idea of how we treat everyday products that we use. There's a term here called the throwaway society. The United States, unfortunately, has become the leader of the throwaway society. It hasn't always been that way. I mean, I can actually remember a time where, you know, disposable um, diapers were not really used that much. In fact, when I was a baby, I talked to my mom about this before. When I was a baby, we used or there was a diaper service. They would come by. We used cloth diapers. Disposable ones were. I mean, they were around, but most people didn't use those. They actually washed their diapers. They had a diaper service that came by, picked them up, cleaned them, dropped off clean ones. But nowadays, that's kind of an obsolete thing. We can just take a diaper, have a baby poop in it once, and then just throw it in the trash. So we just reuse another one, or not reuse them, just use another one. All these different types of containers that we use, plastic lids, all the paper, the packaging that's used. We just throw these things away. We use them once and we throw them out. Like plastic utensils. Think about this. The other day I was in Subway, and the whenever I go to Subway, whenever I order my sandwich, I never have them put it in a plastic bag. I just say, "Don't give me the bag. I'll just take the sandwich, whatever." But think about if you get that sandwich put in a plastic bag, like what do you do with the bag? You just take the sandwich out of it and you throw the bag out. It's like, what's the point? I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some things that we could do to help stop throwing away all of this garbage. There's a term here called planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is basically a manufacturing philosophy that was developed after World War II. And the idea is, by these manufacturers, is to create a product that's basically going to break, and you're going to have to go out and buy a new one. You know, a great example of this is phones. A lot of times, we get have this picture here. Yeah, this is a phone, by the way. If you've never seen one of these before, this is the kind of phone that I grew up using when I was a kid. It had a dial on it, had a rotary on it. But this thing was made of metal. You could drop this thing. You could hit it with a sledgehammer. This thing is not going to break. In fact, my grandmother, when she passed away a couple of years ago, she actually had one of these in her basement. It wasn't plugged in, but it actually did work. So if we, I mean, the thing was probably 40 or 50 years old. But think about today's phones. Think about all the changes that have happened to the phone. Eventually, we have this cordless thing. This was kind of popular back in the 1980s. Then, like in the 1990s, we went to like these plastic flip phones. But nowadays, I mean, pretty much these cell phones that we have, I mean, they go obsolete, after maybe a couple of years, and then you have to upgrade them or get a new phone. I mean, they're designed that way. It's called planned obsolescence. But the thing is, if we're manufacturing things to throw them out, I mean, like, what happens to all this stuff when you trash it? When you throw away an old cell phone or old electronics or anything that's completely obsolete, it ends up having to go somewhere. We'll talk about where our electronics go today. Now, the term here is called solid waste. Solid waste is any unwanted material, any discarded material that's not a liquid or a gas. So it could be a lot of things. It could be a Doritos wrapper. It could be an old cell phone. It could be a TV. It could be a plastic bag. It could be a whole bunch of different things. But of all the solid waste that we produce, only 2% of it is produced in our homes. That's called municipal solid waste, MSW. Every week, the garbage truck comes by to pick up your municipal solid waste. That comes out of our home. But that only makes up 2% of all of the solid waste in our country. 98% of it comes from industry. It comes from manufacturing or agriculture or mining. That's where the rest of it comes from. Now we're going to focus in this class, to at least this week, on the municipal stuff, the stuff that we produce in our homes. Now, some of that municipal waste is toxic. Some of the things that we put in our garbage cans can actually be really bad for the environment. Same thing with industrial waste. I mean, that stuff could be toxic. So if it's toxic, that means it's probably some chemical. It can be corrosive or flammable, but things that you don't want in the environment. But again, we're going to focus here on this municipal solid waste. And this is the stuff that we throw away. This is our garbage. 60% of it comes from our homes. 40% of it comes from businesses like schools and post offices and restaurants. This all falls under municipal solid waste. Anything that can go into a dumpster or go into a garbage can from anywhere is basically MSW. All right, but again, it doesn't include things like mining waste or industrial waste or agricultural waste. This is all just garbage from our homes or from local businesses. The US leads the world in trash production by far. This to me is an alarming statistic. The US has 4.5% of the world's population. So less than 5% of the world lives in our country. But we produce a third of all the world's trash, a third of it. That is unbelievable. 4.5 pounds per person, roughly. That's on average. That's 2 times as much as other industrialized countries. It's 5 to 10 times as much as developing countries. Now, when it comes to producing all this trash, there's two things that we have to kind of keep in mind. One, a lot of our natural resources, a lot of our non-renewable resources are used to create that trash, and we just throw it all away. And secondly, there's a lot of pollution that is generated through all of this trash that we produce. Air pollution, water pollution, land, soil pollution. Some of it's solid and hazardous waste. Again, a lot of pollution when it comes to trash. So if we produce less trash, then we can limit these problems. But if we produce more, then we're going to have to, or that's going to magnify these problems. This graph here is just kind of showing you, this is in the United States. Again, this is just showing you the blue line is total municipal solid waste generation. So from 1960 all the way up to modern day, you can just see that we're producing more total garbage than ever. And then, of course, per capita, that's the orange line, that is increased. Now, you will notice that it has actually gone down a little bit here in the last few years. And that's probably because we're getting a little bit smarter about, recycling and things like that. But for the most part, over the last 50 or 60 years, again, that has gone up both total and per capita. The solid waste stream. The solid waste stream is just the flow of all the solid waste. So think about, if you throw something out, where does it go? It enters the waste stream. Now, it could get recycled, possibly. It could get incinerated, which means it gets burned, or it could be put into a landfill, which is where most of our garbage goes in the US, or it could be disposed of in some other way. And we'll talk about these things over the next couple of days, but you got to think about where all of our waste goes. Now, the solid waste stream, again, in the US, we produce 230 million tons of waste every single year. 64% of what we throw out, if you look at this pie chart here, here's 64% right here. 64% of what we throw out is potentially compostable. What that means is it will just naturally break down. And that's not a bad thing. All right, so we kind of want to throw things out that will naturally break down, they'll naturally degrade. But 64% of what we throw out will do that. The other 36% will not. All right, paper makes up the biggest part of our waste stream. Notice here, 31% of what we throw out is paper, and paper is compostable. 65% of what we throw out either ends up in a landfill or it's burned, one of the two. So it goes to those two places. About 35% of what we throw out ends up being recycled. Now, in our country, again, 35%, and this kind of breaks it down for you what we recycle. But in other countries, that 35% is much higher. In some countries, it's lower. So, in the United States, I think this 35 here is a number that we probably want to increase, right? We probably want to recycle more things. Now, if we look at the sources of like where does the garbage come from? Like what are we throwing out? The biggest chunk to this pie is packaging and containers. So we're throwing out, I mean, like whatever, I mean, I'll go back to the Subway bag, right? I mean, that's, I guess, kind of a container or a package, I guess, right? They put our sandwich in the bag and we just throw out the package. I mean, you get a cup that has a lid on it, right? I mean, you throw away the cup, you throw away the lid, you drink the beverage, but you throw away the package. So, I mean, maybe this is a focal point for us. Maybe we can look and say maybe there's a better way that we could package things so that we won't throw them out so much. The term e-waste. E-waste is electronic waste. Electronic waste makes up about 2% of the waste stream, so it doesn't make up too much, but that number is actually going up. We're throwing out more electronics than we ever have before. The United States produces one half of the world's e-waste. So we use a lot of electronics, we throw away a lot of electronics. The problems with all that e-waste is there are chemicals in it that if they get into the water, if they get into soil, that could be a bad thing. Things like mercury and lead, cadmium, heavy metals, POPs, all those things. Um, this is kind of an interesting statistic. Only about 27% of e-waste in the United States is recycled. Now, what most of our e-waste, like we can actually take some of these electronics and make other electronics out of it, but most of our e-waste is actually shipped to China. And we ship it there because they pay us for it and we just send this waste over there and let them dismantle it or take it apart and recycle it, maybe whatever they do. But when they do that, then those people, it's usually poor, it's usually child labor, poor labor that's usually being exposed to a lot of these toxic chemicals. So, e-waste, there's some issues with that. I think we need to do a much better job of not only how we use our electronics, but how we dispose of those things. It's not really the perfect solution here. I want to bring up a couple of other just real quick topics. This is called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Maybe you've heard of this before. There is literally a patch of garbage that mainly consists of plastics or plastic particles that is about the size of Texas, that is floating around what we call the North Pacific Gyre, which is a big body of water that kind of circulates throughout the Pacific Ocean. And this thing's about as big as Texas. And the reason why it's that big is because all these plastics that make their way into the water, either from the United States or from South America or even from the other side of the ocean, China, Japan, the Philippines, they all tend to accumulate because that's where the currents take them. And there's this giant floating garbage patch like out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I mean, that's kind of sad that is out there, but it is. So make sure we kind of know what that is. Last thing, real quick here, I just want to kind of mention this. Um, there is some industrial pollution that is also solid waste. Probably the one that's, I think, maybe the most concerning to us is coal ash. It's also known as slag. These, for example, this picture, you see these two mountains. They're not really mountains. Those are actually just mounds of coal ash. We talked about, I think, Kingston, Tennessee earlier in the year about what happened there. But the thing about all of this, and this is solid waste, I mean, all of that stuff contains chemicals like mercury and lead and all that bad stuff. But I mean, we have to like store it somewhere. They usually just either put it in a landfill or they'll make these giant mountains of them or whatever they do with it. But the thing about all this, I mean, it is toxic. It is hazardous. But the way that these companies get away with this is coal ash is designated by the federal government as something called special waste. It's not like garbage. This is stuff that, unfortunately is a product of the production of electricity. And since electricity is so important that we're actually willing to put a special label on this kind of waste and call it special waste. So it makes it legal for us to produce all of this stuff as long as we put it somewhere where it's not going to get into water or get into the soil, then it's legal. But of course, that's not always a perfect plan because sometimes it ends up getting into water and getting into soil. All right, so anyway, that's just some issues with that. All right, guys, that's it for this first lecture on solid waste. We will continue with this more in tomorrow's lecture. All right, guys, have a good day.